This is the Real Estate Investing 365 podcast, your go-to source for real estate investing strategies so you can start living the life you want and get where you want to go. With your host, Justin Hanna.
Mike, hey, thanks for being here. Today I got with me Michael. Do you have to go by Michael or Mike?
I go by Mike.
Mike. Okay. Mike DeHaan. He's up in Spokane, Washington area. I guess he probably does business mostly in Washington, but maybe a little bit in Idaho as well, right?
A little bit. Idaho's a little bit more difficult, being down in Boise. It's a non-disclosure state.
Mm-hmm.
So we do stuff over there as it comes up because Coeur d'Alene's so close. But definitely like to stick to Washington. It's easier for us to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, since you mentioned that right off the bat, we'll just dive in. What do you mean by non-disclosure state?
Well, you can't find a lot of the it's like the transactional history with how the the purchases and the sales of the different properties. So it's a lot harder for us to run comps and do all that sort of stuff when we're marketing over there.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of are stuck going by I guess the more general public records that you see on like Zillow and things like that, and not the actual numbers. You probably have a lot of experience trying to tackle that, but as opposed to Washington where you can see everything that's recorded like immediately, and it's really, really simple to have a good understanding of like all the recent transactions to actually run numbers correctly.
Right.
So in Idaho it's just different.
I think there's 5 states that are non-disclosure states. Idaho happens to be one of them. And so if you guys are out there, any of you listeners are out there and you're having trouble finding data in your state and it's not a non-disclosure state, just know you're pretty lucky because like here in Idaho, if you look on Zillow, most of the time it doesn't even say last sale date. If you get onto like PropStream, ListSource doesn't even offer Idaho as a searchable area. So
because like I say, when we've done 2 deals out in Idaho, and both times we pretty much just had to go off of like what was currently listed to try and like project what the properties were worth. That's not exactly the most valid, especially when you're trying to like sell a contract or something like that, and it's like, oh, you're trying to sell it off speculative data. People get very hesitant.
Goofy about it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's jump back for a minute. So tell everybody about, where you came from. What did you do before this real estate gig and how you kind of got started in real estate?
So I guess before real estate, I went to school here in Spokane at Gonzaga University. I got a electrical engineering degree from here. After I graduated, I moved out to the Seattle side. Spokane's in Eastern Washington, in case people don't know that, sort of right on the border of Idaho. Moved over to Seattle, worked for a few years out there in various engineering jobs. I worked for a consulting company, and then I worked for Boeing, which people always think sounds cool, but like literally the worst company that I've ever worked for. And I think a lot of Boeing employees will attest to that. Then moved back to Spokane, just wasn't into the city life, got a job here as an engineer. And then after a year at the utility here, working an engineering job, I decided that, the career path just wasn't right for me. I'd been an engineer for 5 years at that point. And, to my parents' great dismay, I abandoned my expensive private school education.
Yeah.
I wasn't really entirely sure what I wanted to do. So I literally just like walked from my job with no real plan. My original intention was to go back to school, be a physical therapist. I had that idea because I was really into competing in strength and fitness sports at the time. I did a lot of competing in CrossFit, competing in Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, stuff like that. And I was coaching as like a side gig. So I was like, cool, maybe I'd like to do that as like a career. And then I went and started the process of that, worked in a PT clinic. And after about 6 weeks, I was like, yeah, F this. I'm not doing this. This is the worst. This is even worse than engineering.
Yeah.
So, my wife and I, we went on a trip down to New Zealand for almost a month, kind of just traveled around, found myself, whatever, just figured stuff out. And then I decided I wanted to get into tech startups. So I taught myself how to code over like a couple month span. Basically locked myself in my house for the dark Northwest winter and learned web development to, a pretty amateur level. And then as I was starting to try and get into different jobs with tech companies, I realized that, early stage startups, they're going to hire an amateur self-taught developer. They're not going to pay anything.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I guess I better have some form of income. At that period of time, I'd gotten into, kind of like the FIRE movement and, the whole passive income thing. So I was like, cool, I'm going to buy some rental properties. So I basically liquidated all of my old retirement from like my previous engineering jobs. I took out some loans from family members and I bought 2 single family rentals to basically be rental properties. It's kind of funny because like in hindsight, they're properties I would never buy now because they were purely speculative. So like they were $200,000 single family homes. And I was, like to ran the numbers on it. And I was like, hey, so the mortgage payment's going to be like $1,100. I can rent these for like probably $1,500. I'm going to make $400 a month on each one. I'm going to make big money on this. But obviously, that's not how it works once you take into account, CapEx, vacancy, maintenance, just random riffraff that goes on, right? But now it's out of pure luck. Those are actually 2 of my best performing properties because the area up here has grown so much. But yeah, so that was me jumping in. That was 2018 in like June, July standpoint. And then you want me to sort of keep going to where we're at now?
Cutting out a little bit.
Oh, good.
Oh yeah, it's going good now.
So
hopefully that's not.
Do you want me to keep going to where we're at now, or should I?
Yeah, continue on. So that was like 2018. The listeners are probably used to like me messing it up most of the time, so no big deal. 2018, that's where you kind of jumped in, and then what happened after that?
Yeah, so that's about the first 2 single families. Sort of started the landlording there. Then over that period of time, my wife and I we fixed up our personal house, just like learning some basic landlording skills, and then my friend basically introduced me to the idea of a cash out refinance. So, I was like, oh, well, we probably added some value to our house because we added some square footage. So did a cash out refi on our house and suddenly had 6 figures in cash to start growing our business with, because we sort of, I guess, live and flipped kind of accidentally. So I guess that was about our first ones in the summer 2018. December, we bought a duplex with that cash out refi money. That was kind of a funny one because I did it backwards. I didn't have a W-2. So I'm like trying to get a mortgage on this duplex and I couldn't get one. So I actually had to get my parents to co-sign on it with me. Even though I brought all the money for it, it was kind of an odd one.
Yeah.
And then, after that, so I had 4 doors, and then I was like, okay, I'm kind of getting into this real estate thing. So I started getting into more off-market stuff, mainly buying from wholesalers and sort of pocket listings. Flipped a couple houses that next year, had all the lessons learned from that. First house flip, I made $400 after a whole lot of work. That was our net at the end. Had another one that did a little bit better. And then I had a flip where I got cocky and lost about 20 grand. And then 2019, we bought a triplex along with that cash that we'd sort of been accumulating from like the couple of projects that we had. And then that was basically our whole 2019. Then 2020, which is how I guess when you and I got connected, I decided that if I wanted to really sort of grow this business, like the web development stuff was kind of, not really going where I was expecting it to. So I shifted towards the real estate a little bit. And that's when I decided I was going to start basically a direct to seller marketing business and doing straight direct to seller off market real estate myself. And that was, I guess November 2019 when we started that process. And that sort of led us to the business where we're at now. And in 2020, I guess we did 24 transactions. We bought 19 units for the portfolio, and we made just over $200,000 in revenue off of wholesale fees. So
gross revenue or net, or
that's I guess that would be our gross, but our net would be about 140, 150, okay. So not like super crazy numbers, but for coming out of nowhere.
Yeah. For just getting started.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. What utility did you work for as an engineer up there in Spokane?
Vista Utilities.
Okay, Avista. So the listeners know, but you might not. So I was a lineman for 13 years,
Oh,
worked
no
on
way.
power lines, and
Yeah.
I actually worked with some Avista guys during some of the fires down in California. So I was like,
Yeah.
my job would be to run crews that would come and help with us. So
Yeah.
I have like, 4 or 5 crews, 20 or 30 guys, and then kind of be the lead foreman or whatever. And so there's a
Yeah.
bunch of Avista guys that came down there and 2018, and so they're all cool, kind of hardcore, I guess because they're always working in the cold.
Yeah.
But
Well,
little,
it's kind of a weird business up here, right? Because like we have so many electrical issues all the time just because of like the wind and ice storms that we get.
yeah,
Like, so there's kind of like a badge of honor sort of thing that you see with those guys, and it's kind of funny. Like a lot of them are treated almost like veterans, like combat vets. Like you'll see, people like thank them for their service, because they had to like go out on Christmas to get everyone's power back on, or,
yeah.
you'll see like with the license plate covers that say like linesman's wife on it up here. I don't know if that's.
Oh yeah, no, that's just the whole line
Is
work
it?
industry in general. Like I've
Oh,
got
is it?
my friends that are firefighters. There's these shirts that say has a picture of a lineman on it. It says even firefighters need heroes, because
Okay.
when firefighters go out in like electrical thing, they don't do anything until linemen get there to kind of like help, because they don't know anything about it. So linemen are the first ones there. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a hard gig, and yeah, I've got a lot of customers give me like gifts and come out and like buy me breakfast or bring me coffee because you're working all night long. But make a lot of money, but it's just not the gig to stay in for 30 years if you don't love
Yeah.
it. So
It's hard on your body too.
hard on your body. You're climbing poles, working all
Yeah.
night long, a lot of hours, so it's like bad for your sleep habits and stuff. But I thought that was interesting. So a Vista, and then you're into the CrossFit thing and powerlifting and stuff. So I owned a gym, a CrossFit gym down in California, and
Oh,
did
no way.
training as one of the trainers there. We had a few, and then we sold it
Yeah.
before we moved up here to Idaho. So kind of
Oh, sweet.
similar stories along with the real estate and stuff. So that's cool. Good to know.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay. So what else I liked about your story was that you kind of got into a career field back in, 2012 or whenever you got out of college and started doing the whole electrical engineering thing. And you realized it's probably not the direction you want to go, which is what a lot of people do. But instead of just sticking in the career and like spending 10, 15, 25 years there and hating your life, you're like, well, let me try something else. So then you went to the PT thing, and then you went to the next thing, which some people say is like, man, just stick with one thing. But at the same time, it's like, don't keep doing the same thing over and over again that you don't like. Try new things, as long as you can afford it and you are doing well, which it sounded like you were. So that's cool. That's a good story.
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's a fine balance, right? Because, especially nowadays where everyone wants like the instant gratification, it's easy to want to just like jump ship all the time. And, you see so many people, especially in like the late 20s, sort of early 30s age group, that over the last 10 years of their working life, they've had like 9 different jobs in the same field, and they always have something about like how their employers are bad. And it's like, well, after 9 jobs, like I'm starting to think it's you. They can't all be bad. But I mean, yeah, so like for myself, I gave it 5 years, like a good try, and I jumped around to like different parts of the profession as well. Going from like consulting to like working at Boeing is extremely different. And Boeing is like as corporate as you can get. And I just disliked both those companies. And then when I worked at Avista, I actually really liked the company. It was a great company to work for. It's a company that people get in there and, they get treated super well. You get paid super well, especially for the Spokane area. It's a very low stress job because utilities just print money.
Yeah.
So, you're not like trying to meet quotas or anything like that. But then, just so that at that point, I guess I realized, it wasn't the career, it was me. And I think a lot of people need to, it wasn't the company, it was me, right? And it was a career. And I think a lot of people need to, maybe make that sort of realization when it comes to a lot of stuff that, you can only beat something to death for so long for you to make a change.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it's a lot of times too, like you have like no sense of pride being at the company because you're not really like invested in it. You're like, you show up and you do your job and you don't really feel like motivated to do it. You're just doing it to get the paycheck. But there's a benefit to staying there too. You know, a lot of people, like I had Jay Helms on the other day, he's a W-2 capitalist, and one of his things was all about, you know, stay at your job until you can, you know, buy enough to you know, make up what you're making at work, and like use that W-2 income to kind of like excel your growth. But if you're miserable and you're not happy every day, if you have a little bit of buffer, then maybe it's time just to like try it. Because what's the worst that can happen? Like Brandon Turner always says, right? The worst thing that can happen if it fails is you go back to this everybody else normal day life. You can probably always get your job back as electrical engineer.
Yeah, or so at least
yeah,
something similar at least.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just sort of, I guess, depends on your risk tolerance too, you know, because like that thought of sticking with it until you can replace your W-2 income. I mean, that makes perfect sense if you're, I don't know, I guess like depending on your level of comfort. I mean, I guess for me, I've always been like a build a parachute on the way down sort of guy, right? So, you know, from like taking the leap, you know, having that much freedom of your time, if you're a disciplined person, you can get so much farther so quickly. I mean, I know numerous people that started investing before I did, or even the same sort of period of time, you know, and they have like 4 or 5 properties because they save their money every year, and they, you know, buy something that's kind of safe, and they don't really like, I don't know, increase the velocity of their money, right? By taking on the big projects, you know, doing flips, like, you know, hustling, finding contracts, stuff like that. But that's all stuff that, you know, it makes sense if you have that full-time job to approach things that way, because you frankly don't think you would have time, right? If you're working like a 9 to 5 with like a wife and kids, and it's like, yeah, now I'm going to go try to figure out how to, you know, find an off-market seller and flip a house. Like, it's possible, but it's going to be a lot more challenging.
It takes a lot. Yeah. And then if all that time that it takes extra time, so it'll take you like, you know, maybe what would normally take you 1 or 2 months to do might take you 6 months or a year. Then all of a sudden you look back and 2, 3, or 5 years have gone by and you haven't really made any progress. Is the way I look at it, you know? So
yeah, totally.
I definitely understand what you're talking about. So then you kind of got into the direct to seller thing. Tell everybody how did that come about? Like, you're like, okay, I can't just keep buying these deals on market. Obviously there's better deals to be had if I go direct to seller. Was your main goal to like get into that so you can do wholesaling, flipping, or to like try to find rental properties at a discounted price? And what didn't meet your criteria, you would just end up selling off? Is that what the goal was?
Yeah. So basically it came around because traditionally I had been able to find stuff on market, like rental properties that made sense. And the real estate market in Spokane had just gone absolutely crazy through 2019, to the point that you could no longer find rentals at market prices that, you know, made any sense at all. You know, or if it was a decent property, you were competing with 30 plus people that were like trying to purchase it, right? That were bidding on it. And then the people that would win it would buy it at prices that like just didn't make sense. You know, like if it was a house flip, you know, even now we see people buy these flips off the MLS, and like you run the numbers for what they bought it for. Like, yeah, they're going to make like $7,000, you know,
for
it's
all
like
that work.
a lot of work. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, we, you know, I have a business partner who's my best friend from college. And he was also, he's actually my boss at Vista, which is kind of funny, but, he, you know, we basically decided to join up together to do this purely with the intention of buying properties. Like, we had no intention of doing, you know, wholesaling or flips or anything like that. But obviously, you know, we had our criteria, and we're like, yeah, we'll wholesale or we'll flip just to generate capital to make, you know, more, you know, have more money to buy rentals. You know, so that was kind of like our original intention when we jumped into it, was to approach it that way. And then the wholesaling and the flipping side of it sort of came around as a result. But as the markets continue to grow, we've almost shifted more towards doing the transactional stuff, just to basically accumulate more capital so that we can be more, I guess, like selective about our properties. You know, like, it's interesting because when you first start and you don't have a lot of capital, you know, the idea of having more passive income is really interesting. But then, you know, when you do a deal where you suddenly get like a, you know, $20,000-$30,000 check, all of a sudden $200 a month in cash flow doesn't seem as exciting, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a balance, right? You're like, man, what do I really want to do? So maybe it's like, maybe just bank all those big ones and try to save up and then go buy bigger deals.
Exactly. So that's kind of what we do now is like, if it's like a screaming deal that we like, what we call just like a legacy property, like a property that we can see us holding for like a really long time, and the cash flows in a way that makes sense, we'll keep it. But like, there's good properties that we've contracted and we've sold, that when we had our initial conversation a year ago, we probably would have kept at that period of time. But now it's just like, well, we can make, $15,000 to $20,000 now, or we can have $150, $200 a month, for the next whatever number of years. And just like with where the business is and with our kind of like personal goals, it makes more sense to take the current money, right, than the long-term appreciation on those sort of properties.
Yeah.
So
makes sense. Yeah. And I heard this thing the other day. I think Ryan said it is Ryan Dossey, everybody, for those that don't know. He said, what did he say? He said, equity doesn't pay the bills. You need to, or cash. Yeah. Equity doesn't pay the bills. You don't want to be equity broke. You know what I mean? Like you need to be making some cash flow enough to like pay the day-to-day bills if you're trying to build the business. So you can't just keep everything unless you have a, big bankroll going, I guess.
Exactly, right. I think a lot of people tend to lose sight of that because, I mean, especially if you're buying your property that you're going to burr, right? There's such a long transaction time on that, so you go out a huge amount of money before you get any of that back on your refinance down the line. And that's actually a mistake that we made when we first started is shortly after we started working together, we're like, yeah, we're going to buy everything. We bought this duplex, and this duplex was a freaking just dog of a property, right? Like it was, it was kind of one of the reasons that we got into business too. So like one of our main sort of core values as well, I guess, is, I guess our goals is we want to improve like the city of Spokane where we live, because it's kind of like a weird place with the huge separation in like.
I'm gonna cut out again.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah, you're back. So it's kind of a weird place with what?
There's like a huge separation in like income inequality here, because it's not an expensive place to live, but there's not very many like middle ground paying jobs. So basically, there's like kind of high paying salary jobs, or there's really low paying kind of minimum wage jobs, and not a lot in the middle. So as a result, a huge part of Spokane is like sort of slumlord neighborhoods, right? So there's a lot of places that like, there's people that own them that haven't been here for 10 to 15 years. And the people that live in the houses just live in squalor, and as the group of younger investors that started to come in, we started to see that change. But yeah, anyways, we bought this duplex. Numbers wise, it was fine. But the main reason we bought it in was because when we walked it, like, there was this family that was living in the front of this duplex, and like they had like leaks in their ceilings, right? Like the conditions were just horrible. They had a disabled daughter, and like every time they would use a shower upstairs, water would like drip on her bed, so there was just like all this weird stuff. Like none of their appliances worked. It was just a really bad situation. We were like, well, we can't like just like let this go. So we decided to take this thing down. And this rehab ended up being like over 70 grand to do this freaking property. This is when we just started out, and we're basically paying out of savings to do this at the time because we hadn't done any transactional deals yet. And so like point being though, it like crippled us at the start because we were spending all of our money trying to get this property figured out, because our thought was like, oh yeah, we'll fix it up, we'll refinance it out, we'll have all that money back. But we started that property in like April, and with all the COVID nonsense, like affecting like the financial sector, right, and all the banks, we didn't finally get our money out of that until October.
Oh my gosh!
Right. So if that was like our core business model, that'd be like what, one transaction a year, because it's 6 months to do that.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I had 3 refinances, I think, that were supposed to be, 60-day refinances, and they took 138 days to do the refinances, and there wasn't even a burr or anything. It was just strictly for a lower rate. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank goodness I'm not like waiting on this money or something. you know.
Yeah, exactly right. I think a lot of people, they pursue that BRRRR model because they hear it in, bigger pocket stuff like that. But like, I mean, and it makes sense to keep the velocity going. But if you're trying to scale at like with any sort of, timeline, right? Like a short, any sort of speed on it, you can't really make that your core business.
Yeah.
Because you're too at the mercy of like institutions that do not care about your timeline, right?
Right.
In terms of like, so
yeah. Okay. So that makes a ton of sense. So when you guys first got started in your business, that you're like, okay, I want to make some more money, get some more capital going, some more transactional process. Did you kind of just send out your first? Well, first of all, did you go with direct mail or what were you doing? Cold calling? How were you trying to get these off-market deals?
Yeah, so we started with direct mail, and it's funny because we didn't have like our systems or anything figured out yet. And looking at this is so foolish because like I said, I'm kind of like a build a parachute on the way down sort of guy. So we ordered 5,000 handwritten letters, which were like $1 whatever a piece. We spent basically it was like $6,500 on marketing. They sent all of them to my house. We dropped all of them in the mailbox on a Saturday. All 5,000. I was like, sweet, we're gonna get some deals. This was beginning of, I guess not quite beginning of March. So like right pre-COVID, like I was say middle of February. Dropped all 5,000 of them. Got a ton of calls. Very little motivation from anybody. We had no follow-up process, no pre-screening process. Like the whole thing was just like a fiasco, just like answering phones and not really knowing how to, even have like a conversation with the seller, right?
Yeah.
So that whole wave came and went, no deals. So we're like, well, let's do it again. So we pulled another list, same size, spent another $6,000 on marketing. Exactly the same thing happened. Okay. And that was like 3 weeks later. So that was like second week in March. And we're like, maybe it's the letters. Let's send a bunch of postcards. So we ordered a bunch of postcards, and then the postcards went out like second to last week in March. I think last week in March. So that's when COVID and everything started, right? So that was like crickets. We didn't even get a call. And at that point, we'd spent, $11,000 on postcards. Spent about another $3,000 or $4,000. $11,000 on handwritten mail, 3 to 4 on a ton of postcards, not like 12,000 of them. And so we were in the hole like a bunch. And then we were like, okay, we got to be more strategic about this, especially now with COVID. So we went through and figured out like all of our niche lists from the public records, pulling like bankruptcy, failed MLS, all these sort of things. We're like, people must be hurting at this point. And so then we sent out a smaller list. Handwritten letters again, it was like 1,800. So it was just over $2,000 worth of marketing. And that was when we finally got our first deal. And that sort of came around in April and it ended up closing in the beginning of May. And it was a wholesale deal on a single family. And we made $7,500 on our first one after going out right around $18,000 worth in our first couple batches of marketing.
Okay. So you got like, you got less than half of your return back. What list did that end up coming off of? Do you remember?
It was a failed MLS listing. And it was a unique situation because it was a situation that only existed because of COVID, in the way that the guy had listed on the MLS to sell. He actually had an offer on the house, and then COVID started, but he had tenants in the property, and the buyers backed out because of the tenants that were in there. And it was this whole like situation with that. And then he had actually started a reverse 1031 exchange. So he had to sell the house because, he had already bought a property in Arizona that he was planning to reverse 1031 this money into. If anyone doesn't know what a 1031 exchange is, basically a like kind exchange where you can sell a property, an investment property, and roll it directly into another investment property of greater value, and you don't have to pay any taxes on your gains on the sale. But in order to do that, you have a 45-day timeline.
And you can do it And you can do a reverse 1031 too, which a lot of
Mhm.
people haven't ever heard of. Reverse is kind of
Yep.
you buy the property that you are interested in first, but the everybody, when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, that's perfect. I'll buy the property and I'll sell these other properties. The problem is you have to have the money to buy this first property first.
Yep.
And then the second money has to like go towards something. I forget exactly how it works, but that's what a reverse is, right?
Yeah, so you can basically like replenish the amount that you put into the new property. And then there's like a difference there. You have to pay tax on it. But anyway, he was trying to divert taxes, and he'd already bought his reverse property. His new property. So he was trying to reverse this one, and he had like 3 weeks to get it. So we purely just circumstantial, right? But that's the name of the business. Honestly, is just being in a position to have those opportunities. And that's why you approach people off market like that. So yeah, we got that one. And that was our first deal. So, we recovered less than half of our money. But then the crazy thing was, off that same batch of that like 1,800 letters that we sent out, that was all the niche lists, we got 3 more deals over the next month. So, we basically hit like these giant numbers, and then, these giant lists. And then over these niche lists, all of a sudden we had 4 contracts over like a 6-week period. And then, basically we made some really good money off of those. And that sort of got us going with a little bit of momentum.
What lists were the other properties off of? Were those failed MLS lists also?
So yeah, actually another one there was a duplex. There was a failed MLS listing that we wholesaled for $10K. There was a bankruptcy, like a filed bankruptcy from a couple years ago. And then there was somebody who actually had a recorded water lien. So basically they hadn't been paying their water bill. And it came off of that. So
okay. How did you, because a lot of people might be asking, like, how do you even go get these lists? Like, how did you get, well, first, what is a niche list, if anybody doesn't know? And then how do you get those niche lists?
Yeah. So, I mean, like a niche list is, so I guess what they say, like the sort of larger list that investors will hit will be, absentee owners, right? Or like seniors, stuff that's pretty easy to pull. You go and, you can find like a senior list or an absentee owners, you can pull all those off of list source, right? But
or
the niche
stream.
list or prop stream. Yeah. I guess you can get seniors off prop stream now, can't you?
Yeah. Who knows how good it is? I don't really know.
Yeah, I know, right? But yeah, so the niche lists are basically things that could potentially point to somebody having motivation to sell their property, right? So, usually it's like some kind of like personal distress, a financial distress. It's kind of like a wide range of what falls into that. So, the stuff that we do is like, failed MLS listings, vacant properties, people that have filed bankruptcy, pre-foreclosures, stuff that's all publicly recorded. And in the state of Washington, you can find those on PropStream, which is a software. The accuracy of it's up or down. We find that there's a lot of bad data on PropStream on a regular basis. What we've actually started doing is having we have a VA now that goes and like combs the public records to try and get stuff sort of before it's on like PropStream, which can be upwards to a couple years delayed. But yeah, I mean it's pretty wide ranging.
So she logs into like the county. Most counties out there will have like their public record search portal or their court record search portal, and you can like log into it a lot of times. Like here in Idaho, there's some of it I can't log into, but most other places like Washington, or I know Arizona is like you can get everything on there. You log in and then you can search like recorded docs, search for Liz pending or probate records. And so you probably have her go through and read the documents like on power of attorney. And on the power of attorney, at some point in the document, it'll give an address. And then so what does she do? She just records that address down in a spreadsheet and does that a whole bunch of times and then gives you the list.
So it's unfortunately more complicated than that in Spokane County now. So how it used to work up until I think 2019 was when they changed it, was you could do exactly like you're saying. But now if you want to view the actual documents, you have to essentially write into the county say exactly which documents you want, pay a document fee, and then they'll release the documents to you, right? If they approve like who you are in relation to the individual. So what they tried to do was cut down on people doing exactly what you're talking about. Okay. So what we literally have to do is, it goes, they can see that there was a lis pendens, it's basically a lien report recorded against this person. You can see the name of the individual, but you see no details. So what we essentially have to do is find that person. We have to go skip trace them, either on Spokeo or like Real People Search, or even just Google sometimes, social media, whatever. See if you can like verify that they're actually somebody that lives in Spokane, and you can potentially find an address. Then we verify that address with the county records to make sure that it's actually them that owns it, and they're not just like a renter that is associated with that address.
Like on the county tax records?
Yeah, so we have a system called Scout, which is like the assessor website where you can go and you can see who owns everything. So basically then what we do is we say, so this person had a lien filed against them, and they own this property, because we've gone through all the steps to sort of verify a connection there, and we can see on Scout that they own it. Maybe there's a desperation there, and we basically just still have to do a little bit of a Hail Mary to try it out. But that's essentially what we have to do, is we see the correlation and we give it a shot. So
that's a lot of groundwork. So let me just reiterate that, because I might be able to do that. I didn't even think about doing it that way. So you have your VA go online, and it shows the name of, like, let's say the plaintiff or the defendant, or however it's stated online. So you just get the name, and the city or the county that they're in, right? So then you go and you search that name in the area, and you find a person, and then or you find that person and you find their address based off of skip tracing. Then you take that address from there, and you go and look in the county data to make sure they own that address. That same person owns that address. And then you mail or call or whatever you do to that address, because it's like 3 steps, right?
Yeah. It's a complex process, and it's very button clicky, and the results are super mixed. And that's why we pay a VA to do it. Like, he has a couple of different lists that he goes through every week. He does this exact same process with like lis pendens, people that are going to divorce court, people that are going to probate, all stuff that we can see like the reason that they're in court, but not necessarily the details of the process. He does that every week for us, and basically goes through and collects everything, and it's a full-time job. It's extensive.
That's awesome. Okay, so you see, everybody, there's ways to get the information. You just gotta figure it out and dive in there. So okay, so you guys kind of spent a bunch of money, like 15 or 18 grand before you got the first deal, and then it really didn't return very much. But luckily, you ended up getting several more deals off that same batch of mailings. So I guess that then put you in the positive. So that's 4 deals, and then by the end of 2020, ended up doing 22. What was the process like? How did it all of a sudden like ramp up so much quicker? Like, was it all because of these niche lists, or did you start doing something different?
So, I mean, the biggest turn that took for us, the change for us, was when we hired an acquisitions manager in October. So, we had been, so I guess me and my business partner, we're 2 engineers, right? We're very, sort of like logically driven. We focus on the house. We're looking at keeping these properties, right? So we weren't the best at building rapport. And so, we had a super good like June, July. In August, we had a huge deal that gave us like some good buffer room. And then suddenly August and September were like, I guess it was the very beginning of August. The rest of August, September were like completely dry. And we felt like we had like nothing even remotely close to a deal. So we were like, going through everything, and we were like, at that point we'd mailed everyone, we'd contact everything. So we're like, is it like our data bad? Is Spokane too small? Like, and then we like talking to other people who were getting, 3 to 4 deals a month in our market. And we're like, what are we doing different? And then, we kind of came to the realization, maybe it was us. Maybe we're the problem, right? So, we started trying to find someone, hire on somebody. And over the course of like, it was like a 10-day process. We put out a job listing and we had someone starting on as like an acquisitions manager. So, you know, we just jumped right into that whole thing. Anyway, we found our AC manager, who's was interesting because so she's you know, mid-30s, female, military wife, no like extensive background in sales experience, you know, no real estate experience really, but just like a really solid people person, you know, and like really good at like having a conversation and building rapport. And it's funny because when we were going through our process, she was kind of like our dark horse, and we were interviewing people and we had like all these people that the resumes checked all the boxes, but after like talking to her was just so easy. We're like, you know, we'll just keep her going through. And then, you know, we decided to bring her on. Anyway, you know, our initial goal was like, we'll start her in the beginning of October. We'll give her like a month to sort of figure stuff out, and then we'll start ramping it up. 2 days in, she was like, I'm ready to go. Like, you know, put me on the phones. Like, I want to jam. We're like, okay. Anyway, she comes in 2 weeks later, she has 7 contracts, all off of the leads that were already in our system, that we had basically just failed to close. Right. So she was you know, she just had that skill set. Right. And then over the course of the rest of the year, I mean, she had not quite a contract a week, but she was just crushing.
So what does she do different on those 7 deals? Like, what is she saying differently? Like, you know, why is it so much different than what you guys are doing?
And it's such an interesting question. And you know, I've kind of thought about this a lot. And one part of it is her persistence is really impressive. Like in her ability to just like, I don't know, take a leap, right? And like just like ask hard questions and, you know, really pursue stuff in a way that is I don't know, like extremely confident, right? Like so for example, one of the leads that she got, one of the deals she got, we couldn't even get this lady to like answer the phone anymore. She completely ignored us. So we told her about this lead, and she's like, okay, fine. She just went down and like drove to this lady's house and knocked on her door.
Oh my gosh.
And had a cup of coffee, or maybe I think it might have been a glass of wine, actually, thinking about the seller. And that she had a contract 20 minutes later, you know, but like that's just like the kind of level of stuff that most people wouldn't do, myself included. Yeah. And then just in the way that she talks to people, you know, she is really good at connecting with them and focusing on them, you know, whereas, you know, Dan and my business partner and I would go in and we'd be like, oh yeah, you know, you got to redo the roof, you got to, you know, do the floor, you got to do all this sort of stuff. People already know that. You know, most of these people, what they want is they want someone to connect with, you know, especially since they're usually coming from a difficult place. And she's extremely good at that. You know, because when it comes to especially doing off-market real estate, it's not really a real estate business anymore. It's a marketing business, right? And, you know, for marketing to be effective, you have to be able to connect with individuals. You know, that's why like giant brands spend hundreds of millions of dollars advertising, you know, in these ways, trying to connect to people, because that's what you need to do. And that isn't any different from what we're doing. So it's just different mindset.
I think it's good to remember, this is something that I'm like slowly learning, because for one, I freaking hate calling people, even if it's already a lead that's like called me, right? And like they've shown some interest. If I have to call them or call them back after I've made them an offer to like follow up, dude, I get nervous. I just like get in my own head. I hate doing it. And I hired a cold caller this last week. And so he's calling like, you know, 300 to 500 numbers a day. He has no problem. He'll talk to people. He'll let them cuss them out. He'll like build rapport. And so, you know, what we need to remember is that people are built totally different. You know, one person might be all about the analytics, like going in for the numbers, doesn't care about anything else, no emotion. Another person like might not even know how to add 2 + 2, but they can strike up a conversation and talk about family and all of a sudden be best friends with the person in 20 minutes, you know? So I guess if you're wanting to build the business, you have to like branch out and try to find somebody that does exactly what you're not good at doing.
Totally. And I think Exactly. And I think that's kind of the key. And it's funny, even when we started, you're like, I need to hire somebody that I can like train to do what we need them to do. And it's like, yeah, that's true to a point. But when you're a small business, like, I mean, there's 4 of us, if you include, my VA and our AC manager, right? We have a full-time VA. I mean, what you need is somebody that's going to balance out your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need another you. If you just need another you, just keep doing what you're doing, right? Like, especially if it's a full-time gig for you. You don't like hire somebody out and just lose your income when they're going to do the same thing you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know that's interesting though with the calling. Yeah, and that's how I always was too. Is I don't like calling people, even if somebody that I have great rapport with. It's hard for me to do. And she'll like have a lead. She'll be like, yeah, they want 500 for their house. And like, we'll look at the photos and they'll be like, yeah, the best we can offer is 220. And she'll be like, okay. She'll just call and be like, yeah, I know you want 500, but we can only do 220,000. And then she'll text me and be like, yeah, they told me to F off. I'm like, okay. See, I wouldn't even have made that call. I would have been like, that's fruitless.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I got a phone call last night, actually. What is today? Today's Sunday, the 17th of January. Last night at like 8:30, I'm like, phone's ringing and I'm like, honey, I tell my wife, should I answer this? She's like, yeah, answer it. Maybe it's the person you made an offer to. Well, it was the person I made the offer to's son calling to yell at me about the low offer on their house. But they don't realize that, they have sentimental value in the house, which I understand, but the house is trash. It's like a hoarder house. I mean, nobody's lived in it for a couple years. There's like mice droppings and food left in there for 2 years. Right. Yeah. So they don't understand like why my offer was low. Yeah. But there's $100,000 in work that needs to be done to this place. So it just like made me I didn't sleep all night because I was like amped up about this phone call, so I need to hire somebody to take these calls for me.
Seriously.
So one thing I wanted to touch on real quick, because I read this Bigger Pockets article the other day that came out on Big BP Insights, and the author was saying how he hates and despises wholesalers, and he thinks it's like wrong that people are just out there to take advantage of people and give low offers and things like that. So I had kind of thought about that, but at the same time, I think my main purpose in going direct to seller is to try to find rental properties. If they don't meet my numbers, maybe they'll meet somebody else's numbers, and then I can hand them off to people. What's your thoughts on that, on the whole, if somebody says, yeah, wholesalers are just trying to take advantage of people that are in a bad situation?
I mean, it's a weird question, right? This is something that we've talked about with our AC manager too, because, she gets connected with these people. The big thing is like, it's essentially, you're solving these people's problems, right? And it's funny because people are like, oh, they could have gotten more for their house, but you assigned it and all this sort of stuff. But I mean, if you think about it, right, what a wholesaler is essentially a broker. You have the seller, you have a buyer, you make a connection, and that's where you make your money. It's exactly the same as a real estate agent. So like you have some real estate agents that, you use to sell your house. Let's say you sell your house for $400,000. At the time you paid the realtor fees and like all the other fees along the transaction, you're walking away with what, $360,000? So you basically just lost $40,000 on your house, right? So like, let's say that we find someone who, wants to sell their house, and the house needs a lot of work, and we get it for, let's say, $100,000, and we find someone else that is willing to pay $110,000 for it. We made $10,000 on that, right? But that's still better than if they had listed it at like, $130,000 or $140,000 or whatever it potentially be worth, and they listed with like an agent, even not quite there. But either way, you get the point, right? Like that brokerage process costs money, and that's all a wholesaler's doing, and I think there are some scummy people out there who will go like, beat up sellers, and they're trying to like really knock them down, or, so they can maximize their profit on the spread. But that's just not how we've done business. Like we actually do make people a fair offer, and we find their needs, and make sure that they're getting met, so that, they get what they need out of the deal. And then, our spreads are usually pretty reasonable. But I mean, I don't know, it's a tough thing because you hear about people doing all sorts of weird stuff to beat up sellers.
Definitely. I agree. And it's like, you got to keep you are there to make money, but at the same time, people are in hard situations. I walked away from a deal last week that I probably could have gotten made a good amount of money on, but it's like the guy was really old, he's feeble, and I didn't know if he was really like of right mind. I didn't have any other family members to talk to. And so I kind of pointed him in a different direction, said maybe you should talk to an agent on this, even though he was like willing to give it to me for a less price. I'm like, just didn't feel good taking advantage of the situation, On the other hand, a lot of people, they have like fear of missing out, right? So they think, oh, if I sell it to this wholesaler, I'm going to get this price. And they say, oh, I can get so much more. Maybe, but
yeah,
you're not going to hire somebody to come clean this place up. You're not going to do all this work. You haven't done any work for the last 5 or 10 years on the damn place, right? It looks horrible. You're obviously not a very successful person. Like, let me just like cut you a check, and then you don't have to worry about the work, and then you can just move on. So there's a value to convenience, I'd say, in a lot of this.
Totally. And that's exactly it. You're providing a service, in exchange for equity on the property. And, I think that if you're kind of upfront about that, then that's usually fine. And one of the things that we do as well, is we really make sure that, we're directly associated with our business, and, like people know like who they're dealing with, so that, it's, more trustworthy for them. And also B, like, I don't know, it's a lot harder to be doing sketchy stuff if your face is branded plaster all over your brand, right? I know these wholesalers that hide behind this mystique of being like an off-market cash person, and they do some of the tactics that I've heard people do to make more money are ridiculous. Yeah. I've heard it was someone on Instagram, I forget who it was, but one of the things that he was plugging was how to make an extra $2,000-$3,000 on every wholesale deal is he'll like literally call them on closing day and be like, hey, yeah, so sorry, things changed. We got to drop the price $3,000. Otherwise we can't close today. And the person will be like at the signing table, like ready to go. It's like, of course they're going to take that, right? It's a sunk cost bias. And I was like, and you're lying to them to take money out of their pockets,
That's crazy.
People that do stuff like that give all of us a bad name, but it's just like everything else. I think if you have good ethics, and you approach things with the intention and the being what's the right word, being intentional about helping people, then it's no different than like a traditional broker in my mind.
No, definitely. Okay, right on. Well, that's good information. So what's the plans in the future? Like, where are you headed? What's the goals for 2021? And are you guys going to continue with the wholesaling business and like trying transactional, or are you going to look for bigger properties?
Yeah, that's kind of the good question. So I guess going forward for the year, I mean, obviously we started gaining a lot of momentum October, November, December. So we're going to try and keep that ramping up. Still doing some wholesaling stuff. We've started to do some more flips, just because of how the market is. Like, it's difficult to find deals at like wholesale sort of prices, but you can find stuff at like reasonable flip prices, right? So we started doing some more stuff like that. And then we've kind of gone back and forth because we bought so many properties last year that we had to basically empty our coffers a little bit, right? So I think for the beginning of the year, we're just going to focus on rebuilding that cash reserve by doing some more transactions. I mean, our goal for the year was 50 contracts this year. We figured just under a contract a week would be pretty valid. Whether those are wholesale flips or purchase doesn't really matter. But I think that would be a pretty successful year. So
sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Mike, I appreciate it. Where can people find more about you or reach out to you if they have any questions or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest place, my investor Instagram is just at Mike Invests. You can follow me on there. You can shoot me a message. I'm always happy to chat with people about stuff. And then if you want to send me an email or something more long form, my business email is just mike@sell2inw.com. And
Sell
feel
to
free
what?
to sell to INW.
INW.
Yeah, like Inland Northwest. So sell to INW.com. Send me an email there. And then if you want to, if you're looking to invest up in Spokane, let me know. We can put you on our buyers list, or I'd be happy to connect with you locally up here too. So
Sweet.
Cool.
Right on. Well, Mike, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And everybody reach out to him if you have any questions or you want to buy some deals up there in Eastern Washington. So thanks, man. Have a good afternoon.
Yeah, thanks, Justin.